Tell us the story of how each church came into being. Let's start with you, John T.
Yeah, so Globe Church is a slightly unusual church plant. So we started very much from scratch in 2015, but the plans for it started a couple of years before that, and really were about a conversation between a bunch of FIEC pastors in London who shared a common love for London and a desire to see something happen and new ideas. And we were kicking lots of thoughts around, and just friends getting together, saying, what could we do? And the idea began to grow that we'd love to see a new FIEC church in the centre of London, seeking to reach students, young professionals, and the community, the very transient community of central London. And so it's from those discussions and from that group of friends really that it was suggested, and we grew from there. And so I moved into central London with my wife and my 3 boys in 2015, and then just started to gather a small little team. So we didn't have a group from one church. We had no shared history. So it's quite an unusual way to start. And we started in our front room. We ate together, we prayed together, we studied the Bible together. And then from there just began to grow. And we moved into a hotel and then launched publicly in September 2015. And it's just been exciting to try something. It felt very risky. It felt like there was nothing really there, and to have a go and to pray and see what would happen. So that was the origin really of where it came from.
And Sam, what about Hope Church Vauxhall?
Yeah, so Hope, very different in lots of ways. Vauxhall Gardens Estate, which is where we are. London City Mission have been working in Vauxhall Gardens Estate for at least 50 years before we started, and there'd been an attempted church plant that hadn't really worked out. And off the back of that, there were conversations with the FIEC and London City Mission and Co-Mission, church planting network here in London. And John T was involved in those conversations. And so John T and Globe Church kind of had this desire to be involved in something, but weren't really able themselves to kind of just take this work on. There was a continued desire to have a church plant that actually sort of functioned. The attempted church plant hadn't really worked out, and there was this desire from all these parties to have something going. I'd known John T from a previous church together, and so John T got in touch with me and said, "Hey, would you take a look at this?" I met with Kev, who was the London City Mission missionary there, the team leader there, and the two of us kind of spent some time chatting together, seeing if we could work together. I met with John T to see if how we would be able to do this. And essentially then what ended up happening, I moved into the area, started going along to Globe Church. We gathered a little group of people, a handful of people from Globe who were living in and around the Vauxhall Gardens estate. And a few people from other churches. We started meeting once a month to sort of pray and explore what it might look like to plant a church on the estate, for the estate. In a sense, different to Globe, the desire was the church would be for the people of the Vauxhall Gardens estate, with a particular desire to reach the poorest in the community, majority kind of council estate. And so in September 2018, after 6 months of being at Globe, I planted, and we planted as a team of about 20 adults, a couple of kids. We planted Hope Church Vauxhall.
So from the get-go, there was a very close relationship between the two churches.
Yeah, so I was employed by Globe Church for those first couple of years, and was looked after by their staff team in a sense. So we'd go along to their meetings, and then as we started to grow, that just sort of naturally moved into me sort of leading stuff within Hope Church and having the team there.
And could you just locate us geographically in London, how the churches are? Globe Churches?
Yeah, so Globe Church is around the kind of London Bridge area. We've moved down a little bit towards Elephant and Castle now, but really pretty central. Vauxhall's only a mile and a half away. Yeah. Not that far, but in terms of the culture and the way the community works, it's like a different universe. So it's an interesting thing that we in Globe Church, we're never going to be able to reach this estate. No one from the estate in Vauxhall would have come, even though it's only a mile away, would have come to Globe Church, and it wouldn't have been appropriate. It wouldn't have worked really, and so we were never going to reach the estate, but we were able to be involved in seeing the estate
So
Really.
two churches on the South Bank, essentially,
Yeah.
but in two very different settings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But now we have Yannick here. Yannick, tell us about Stockwell.
Yeah, so Stockwell Baptist Church has been around for a very long time. So 1866 is when it got started. So it's been around for, lots
Back in Spurgeon's day.
Back in Spurgeon's day. So Spurgeon preached the first sermon here, which it's kind of been downhill since. But that's fine. But yeah, so 1866, so it's been around for a long time. My involvement came about 3.5 years ago. I was part of a church called Brixton Local Church, which was a church plant in Brixton, planted through a guy called Jason Mariner. So I was part of that church plant. Found out about Stockwell Baptist Church. At the time, there wasn't a pastor at Stockwell Baptist Church. Got to meet the church here, got to meet the congregation, had more conversations, and really just fell in love with the church here. Saw that they had lots of what we needed and vice versa at Brixton Local Church. And so through lots of supports and, FIEC, people like you, Trev, and many, many more people than I could say, September 2019, Brixton Local Church merged with Stockwell Baptist Church. And so that was about 3.5 years ago. But yeah, there have been people who've been part of this church for decades and decades. And it's a blessing to be part of them, but also just part of the long history of the church, which is, amazing.
And how did you get to know Sam and Jonty?
Yeah, so Sam, we met because we were both helping to run something called Westminster at One, which was amazing. I think I'd just come back from studying in America, so just coming back into London, and was told we would be doing this thing together. And it was, a great joy to do it week on week. And I think one of the highlights of it really was getting to meet Sam. So that's how our kind of relationship started. We were part of the same network, and then met Jonty as part of the same network. I think the first conversation I remember, anyways, I might be wrong properly, was from Westminster at One as well. Actually, you started coming a few times. So I remember us getting to sit down and talk. And so those were the initial parts, but you guys might remember it different to me. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there was nothing strategic about it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was completely organic. Humanly speaking, it was completely random. It isn't that we said, "Oh, this would be a sensible partnership. Let's seek this out." It was actually, we looked around and said, "Oh, here are guys that love Jesus. We believe the same gospel. We want to do the same things," and so it really grew out of that. I certainly don't want to give the impression that there was some big strategic aim in these. And often it is that, isn't it? You look around, you go, "Well, who are the people around me? Who are the people that God's put in my path, perhaps in random ways, that actually say, oh, perhaps this is someone that God has put there for a reason that we could work with."
But in the providence of God, you are in quite close proximity to each other now, and yet in three very distinct settings. Could you just tell us a little bit more about each of your churches' kind of setting, character, the neighbourhood around?
Yeah. I've got to be honest, Trev, I think... I want to say this carefully. Globe Church is not a great model of how you should do church. I am absolutely convinced that the normal pattern for church ministry is a local church based in a local area, reaching a local community. That was what I'd done previously, is what I'd done up in Enfield. But I also became convinced that there are situations where that model is not necessarily the most effective model to reach a particular community. And I think what we noticed in London is that there really are two communities going on. And this is probably true in lots of cities. There is people talk about it as the anywhere people and the somewhere people, right? There are some people in London, they could live anywhere, right? They found a cheap flat here, but in 6 months' time, they may well find a cheap flat over here. So for them to go to a local church in Camden makes no sense, because they have Camden's not their place. And so we very much wanted to position Globe as a church that would really serve that community. So if you're moving from here to here to here to here, to have a central church where you can be discipled, you can build a community, and you can bring friends, and you can share the gospel, seemed to us to make a lot of sense. But that does mean then the nature of the church is very transient, because people will often be in that kind of moving around type phase of life for not very long. So what's happened over the 7 years is that a lot of people have come and then gone again, which is exactly what we set up to do, right? That we've seen people head off to different places and to be a blessing, God willing, in other churches. We get them for a few years, we train them up, we send them out. But the other thing we've seen is people saying, no, we want to stay. And the people who've said we want to stay are the people who've moved towards and who've actually become much more connected to the area where we are. So we still have that transient thing going on. But then we're beginning to develop a core of people who say, no, this is where we want to be longer term, and therefore have moved closer.
But the transient element is London, isn't it?
Yeah.
People are in a place, especially young adults, just
Well,
for a few years.
It's one section of London.
Yeah.
Because what you're going to hear from Sam in a second
sure.
is that there's a whole section of
Yeah.
London which is not transient at all.
But I'm trying to get to, there is a validity to the globe, in the sense you are trying
I like to think
purposely
there's
to
validity.
to meet that group. Yeah. Sam, tell us, very different situation there.
Yeah, very different, very different. So we're essentially trying to reach one particular local area. So the Vauxhall Gardens estate. So predominantly social housing, and I think that when I arrived in Vauxhall, what I realised is lots of churches, whether or not they've meant to do this, have kind of moved towards a sort of people just come to London for a short amount of time and go, and a short amount of time and go, and there was therefore a lack of outreach and ministry and opportunities to reach into places like Vauxhall. And because Globe were passionate about doing that, even though it wasn't their vision, they were passionate about doing that. I was passionate about doing that. That's why we started the church. So essentially, the makeup of the area is predominantly kind of working class, white working class predominantly, but then a whole range of anyone from anywhere. People have come in and moved into the UK and moved into London over the last sort of 30 or so years, longer than that. So a real mix, but still sort of predominantly white working class. And most people, no, that wouldn't be fair. I think probably 50% of people will probably have lived in Vauxhall most of their lives. Their kids will have grown up there, or they will be children of people who grew up there. They've moved from one council flat to another, but they've tended to live in the same sort of square mile or so. And then on top of that, you're getting people who come from overseas and move into council flats and social housing. And then you've got a scattering of kind of privately owned ex-council flats that have been bought and then sold on. And that tends to be young professionals who are living in and around the area, people working in Westminster, because we're a good sort of short walk from areas like that. So lots of civil servants and others. So that's the kind of community. And what we were trying to do was to be a church for the whole of that community. What we're trying to do is be a church for that whole community, but with a particular aim at doing church in a way and reaching people who are ordinarily kind of not the typical kind of churchgoers, and so particularly aiming for the kind of the guys in the social housing, and try and do church in a way that works for them. And then I guess we've benefited from the training of guys at Globe who were then part of the team that kind of started us up, but then also people genuinely committing. So people who at this stage in their life would often be thinking, I've been here in London for 3, 4, 5 years. Now's the time to kind of settle down, to move out to the outskirts, somewhere cheaper. And we've really kind of been pushing people to say, that's fine, but that's not the only way to do London living. And actually you can stick around, you can...
Because you still need this core element.
We still need the core element,
Globe.
yeah. So we want a balance. Like over time, we want the core to grow out of the sort of the local community who've been there for a long time, the indigenous people in a sense. But at the same time, certainly right now, we need people to stick around. And those people have been such a blessing to me and my family kind of personally, but also to the church. And actually that's where, 3, 4, 5, God willing, because we're almost 5 years old now, but God willing in 10 years time, those people sticking around will have developed those relationships. Their kids will have grown up in the community, in the school, and they would have become part of that community in a real sense, rather than sometimes what happens, which is a church from the outside trying to do mission on an estate, but not having any links. We're looking for a more long-term vision where over time the church will both be people who've moved from the outside who have put down sort of roots there, and people who've lived there forever who've been converted by the good news of Jesus. That's what we're aiming for.
This is the fascination of London, isn't it? Because you are up, just to locate it for people, you're near the Oval cricket ground, basically.
Yeah.
And we're just half a mile down from that, and we're at Stockwell, and a very different setting. Yannick, just tell us a bit more about the church here and the makeup of it, and how you're going about reaching people.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's really helpful hearing from these guys. Was making me think. So Stockwell, in terms of the church is predominantly a black church, very multi-generational, because that was one of the things that happened in the merge. So you've kind of got people, I had a funeral yesterday, so I do a whole bunch of funerals and a whole bunch of baby dedications, which is nice. But that's the kind of range in terms of age. Demographic-wise, again, it's a majority black church, but lots of variety within that, lots of Caribbean people and lots of people from all kinds of places within Africa as well. The area is not what it used to be. So I want to use the word gentrification, but people have all kinds of thoughts when it comes to that word. I'm not using it with any, forget the baggage. But Stockwell, there's been lots of gentrification. And so 10 years ago or so, this area was, just very much a black area. And historically so, Stockwell and Brixton, Windrush, when that happened, the main place that people settled was here in Brixton. And lots of our older members are people from the Caribbean who settled here in the early 60s. The area's changed quite a lot. It's a lot more white than it used to be, and that's definitely one of our challenges. Is we want to reach the area. We want to reach people in Stockwell, and we have a heart for that. And so, seeking to do that, we're definitely a church where we get people from here, there, and everywhere. And so that's a blessing, but also a challenge in terms of keeping the focus on trying to reach Stockwell. I think the other thing to maybe throw into it is that, again, it's predominantly a black church, and there's lots about black church culture that we love and appreciate. That's my background. And just given who we have, we want to reflect that and do that well. We think there are things about that black church culture that are great and good, and I think there's just not many places within what you might call conservative evangelicalism where people can experience that, can train in that kind of context. And so really have a heart to do that, to help train people. Would love to see, lots of other kind of churches and ministries supported through that. And so seeking to reach the area, but also seeking to, preserve some of the beauty of what you might call the black church.
And Sam, you said, I think, about 50% of your folk are really local. What would that percentage be here?
Depends what you mean by really local. So Stockwell, I'm gonna say, if you just say Stockwell, it's about maybe 30%. And then if you expand it a little bit, then maybe you'll get about 40, 50%, just surrounding regions. Then 40, 50, maybe even slightly over 50.
And there is a kind of historic reason behind that, isn't it? In that you talked about gentrification. So basically folk that were living here, it became a point where they could no longer afford to live here.
Right.
Perhaps family came along and so on. So they moved out a few miles, but their ties are still very much back in with Stockwell Baptist.
Exactly. So that's the case for lots of the members are people who, again, were at the church for years, moved away because the area became a lot more expensive. But so connected to the church. And it's probably, the other thing to say, again, it's predominantly a black church, is that traveling for church is actually just a more common thing in black church traditions. So I grew up in Beckton, so East London, and we grew up in a church that was in Peckham. And it was never a conversation. It was nothing, we never even spoke about that. That was just, it wasn't abnormal. So I think that's probably the other thing, but the big thing is to say a lot of these people were people that lived locally and were in the church for years and years and years, and then, kept the connection with the church because of the length of time.
Now, the three of you have been in post relatively short time, but it's been exciting times for the three churches. Would there be one big lesson that you should reflect back on these past years since you've begun in the leadership of the churches that you'd want to impart to somebody who, not necessarily in London, any part of the country that was thinking of either planting a new church or partnering with another church to develop it? What would you say to that? What's the big lesson you think comes out of that?
I can tell you one thing that springs to mind. I think I've learnt not to despise the ordinary. I think particularly in a city like London, but particularly when you're starting something, there is this massive pressure that it's got to be spectacular. Our culture says that everyone's got to make an impact, everything's got to be awesome, everything's got to be fantastic. And I think coming to terms with the fact that mediocre, average, is good, right? That God uses ordinary people to do his work. Relieves a lot of pressure. I think it helps as a pastor to not demand from our church family what the gospel doesn't demand. You see, if everything's got, I find this, right? If the music's not perfect, or if the PA goes wrong, I get frustrated because I'm like, no, you're spoiling this thing that's supposed to be awesome. But they're people who love Jesus, who are trying to serve Jesus. And in that ordinariness is beauty, right? And we had one person come, and I said, why did you choose to stay at Globe? And he said, well, the other churches I went to were just so slick. I was like, oh. But that's right, okay? There is something, now we do want to do things well. We want to pursue excellence. But I just think, and in terms of relationships with people, just enjoying the ordinariness of it.
There's an authenticity in that, isn't there? Because this striving to be absolutely spot on and perfect and so on is not real to life.
Yeah, and people don't want
that.
it.
No.
People see right through it. And they want people who genuinely love Jesus and who genuinely love them. That'd be one thought.
Sam, could I just slightly change the question for you? What one thing would you do differently now with hindsight, with 5 years hindsight?
I'd go slower, I think, and listen to people more. I think maybe it's a church planter thing, maybe it's a pastor thing, maybe it's a character thing, maybe it's a man thing. I don't know, but it's I wanted to kind of set the agenda. I wanted to push people. I think I wanted everybody who was involved to be on my page, and felt like if people didn't agree with not just generally what we were trying to do, but specifically what I wanted to do, that they were, I'm ashamed to say in some ways, but that they were a problem that needs to be gotten out of the way of, or at least probably more graciously someone who needed to have their mind changed to agree with me. And I think I know that led to hurt and pain, and we had some breakdowns in relationships that by God's grace have been restored wonderfully, but that was difficult. And I think that was me sort of going, I've got to drive this, and people have got to agree with me, and I'm gonna push this. And I think that's a kind of church planter, pastor attitude of, right, I'm taking this on, sort of, there's nothing here, I'm going to start something up, and people need to follow me. I think that was wrong, and I was wrong there. So I think slower, listen to people. I mean, we massively benefited from years of London City Missions work. So I think some of the lessons I learned were just what we had that we wouldn't have had if we'd have planted from scratch with nothing, which was just long-term relationships with people, community stuff, people who'd known the ministry and known London City Mission for years and years. And I walked into relationships that already existed. So learning from that, I think if I was doing something from scratch, it would be just slowing down, getting to know people, listening to people, and trusting the Lord more than trusting my own ability to carry people with me.
Great. Well, we've had big lesson: be authentic, slow down, be humble. Yannick, what about for you here at Stockwell?
I mean, if there's one thing I probably want to commend is just the blessing of partnership. So, I mean, we merged, again, Brixton Local Church and Stockwell Baptist Church, and it's not easy. It's not at all easy. It's challenging, it's hard. People lose a lot. Everyone kind of feels like they've lost their church when you do that kind of a thing. And it's hard trying to, bring different church cultures together and find the best. So there's lots I could say about how challenging it is. But the main thing I want to say is just how much of a blessing it is. And if there's one thing I can say is, just to encourage that, to commend that to people, to think through that kind of thing, to think through partnering, for church plants to think about partnering with more established churches, for established churches to think about partnering with church plants. There's just so much that can be gained from that. But it does require lots of humility and lots of sacrifice. And I think that's one of the things I'm still learning is, just how much sacrifice and humility is required to make that happen. But it's such a beautiful thing.
And at the heart of that is actually the issue of relationship, isn't it? You've had to work really hard at the relational side of church, especially when you're dealing with two different groups joining together. And yet that is the heart of doing church well together. Yeah,
it is, and it's harder, and I need to work harder at it for sure. But that is it's actually people relating well to one another, and just again, I guess the thing is you're constantly aware that Satan's always attacking the church, and relationships are just such a key part of where that attack happens. And so constantly just reminding myself to work hard on that and how we relate to one another, not to just leave room for Satan to cause havoc, because often that's what happens is in relationships.